My name is Anna, and I'm 32 years old. I've always thought of myself as practical, cautious, the kind of woman who reads contracts twice, pays her bills early, keeps receipts in folders marked by month and year. I grew up in a small town outside Nizhny Novgorod, where people still nod when they pass each other on the street and ask about your mother's health even if they barely know you. My parents were teachers, quiet people who taught me that debt was shameful and promises were sacred. I met Misha when I was 25. He was everything my mother warned me about: charming, impulsive, a big dreamer with a crooked grin and a taste for expensive clothes he couldn't quite afford. He came from the city, from money, or so he liked to say. The first time I met his mother, Marina Sergeyevna, she was standing on the balcony of their dacha, smoking a thin cigarette and looking at me like I was a stray dog Misha had dragged in from the mud. I didn't mind. I was in love. Marina Sergeyevna had sleek blonde hair that never moved in the wind, lips like a thin slash of paint. She worked in trade. I never really understood what exactly she did, but she wore pearls and spoke quickly on the phone, always telling someone to hurry, sign, deliver. Misha adored her. When we married, a small civil ceremony, no fuss, he joked that he was really giving me to his mother, not the other way around. We laughed about it then. I didn't know how true that joke would turn out to be. The first 2 years were good, mostly. We lived in a small flat I'd inherited from my grandmother, not much, but it was ours. Misha bounced between projects, always chasing the next big contract. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost. When money was tight, I covered the gaps with my salary from the accounting firm where I worked. We were a team, I thought. I was the steady hands, he was the big ideas. Marina Sergeyevna came to dinner sometimes, bringing bags of groceries I hadn't asked for. She would sweep in, criticize my curtains, inspect the fridge, then sit down and tell me about her big plans, the new shop, the import license, the partners in Moscow. I listened politely. I never thought she'd look at me for help. I certainly never thought I'd be the one to pull her out of ruin, or that she'd thank me by trying to steal the roof from over my head. But that came later. I still remember the night she knocked on our door, not with her usual imperious rap, but with small, hesitant knocks, like a child. I opened it to find her standing there, without her lipstick, without her pearls, in a cheap coat that smelled faintly of old perfume and cold sweat. Her eyes were swollen. Misha wasn't home, he'd gone drinking with some friends from his latest venture. So she had come to me. Anya, she whispered. She'd never called me that before, never softened my name like that. Anya, I need to talk to you. She stepped inside without waiting for an answer. I made her tea. She sat at my kitchen table, that battered oak thing I'd brought from my parents' house, and she wept. I'd never seen her cry before. Marina Sergeyevna didn't cry, she sneered, she snapped, she cut with words sharper than knives. But that night she was a small, broken woman in a too-thin coat, clutching her cup like a lifeline. My partners betrayed me, she said. Her hands were trembling so badly she spilled tea on my good tablecloth. They left me with debts, customs fees, unpaid invoices. If I don't pay, they'll take everything. The house, the dacha, my car, they'll ruin me, Anya. They'll ruin your husband too. Do you want that? Do you want people coming for Misha? Of course I didn't. The thought of Misha losing everything made my stomach twist. He was reckless, yes, but he was mine. And Marina Sergeyevna was his mother. How could I say no? She begged me to help her get a loan. She said she was too deep in already, the banks wouldn't touch her. But I could. I had a stable income, good credit, an apartment with clean papers. Your family, she said, her eyes glistening. You're the only one I can trust. That night, after she left, I lay awake until dawn. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, listening for Misha's key in the lock. He came home at 4, reeking of beer and cologne. I didn't tell him. Not yet. In the morning, I went to the bank. I told myself I was protecting my family. I signed the papers. I put up my grandmother's flat as collateral. I told myself Marina Sergeyevna would pay it back in a year, maybe less. She promised. She held my hands and kissed my forehead like I was her own daughter. She promised. I didn't know then that she was lying, not just to me, but to Misha too. I didn't know there was another family. Another house. Another whole life waiting in the shadows while I mortgaged my future to save hers. But I would find out. And when I did, I would not be the same naive girl who believed that a promise meant something, just because it was made with tears. I wish I could say I had second thoughts when I signed those papers, but the truth is, I didn't. I sat in the bank's cold office under the yellow flicker of an old lamp, the loan officer's polite smile slicing through my stomach like a scalpel. I handed over my passport, my flat's documents, my payslips, all the proof that I was a safe bet. When I came home, I found Misha still snoring on the couch, his shoes tossed carelessly in the hall. I watched him sleep, mouth slightly open, the same boyish face that had made me fall in love with him at a New Year's party 7 years ago. I wanted to believe he'd thank me if he knew. I wanted to believe he'd understand why I had to do it. I told him 2 days later. He was nursing a hangover, sipping cold tea and scrolling through his phone. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, that same table where his mother had cried, and told him what I'd done. At first he laughed. Then he stared at me, unblinking, as the words sank in. "You put the flat up as collateral," he said slowly, like he couldn't quite believe it. "She needed help, Misha. It's your mother." His jaw clenched. He didn't yell. He didn't thank me either. He just nodded, muttered that he'd talked to her, and left. I didn't see Marina Sergeyevna for a week. When she finally came, it was with a bottle of expensive wine and a box of pastries I knew she hadn't paid for herself. She kissed my cheeks, told me I'd saved the business, told me she'd already secured new contracts that would double her revenue. "You'll see, Anya," she said, slicing into a cherry tart as if we hadn't just risked our entire home for her. "Next year, you and Misha will have a bigger flat, maybe even a cottage outside the city. I'll take care of you." She said it with that same icy confidence she used to have, the tears gone like they'd never been there at all. For a while, it seemed she was right. She paid the first few installments on time. Misha and I even went out for dinner to celebrate when she cleared the first customs debt. He lifted his glass to me that night, the first real toast we'd shared in months. "To my smart wife," he said, his grin returning. "To family." I believed him. I wanted to. But then the payments got late. First by a week, then 2, then a month. Marina Sergeyevna stopped coming over so often. She always had a meeting, a trip, some urgent crisis. When I called, her secretary answered. When I texted, she replied with clipped excuses. "Next week, Anya." "Don't worry, Anya. You worry too much. Trust me." Misha stopped asking her. Or if he did, he didn't tell me. He seemed to drift further away, spending more time at work, coming home with the same stale beer smell. Some nights he didn't come home at all. I'd sit by the window at 2 in the morning, staring down at the streetlight flickering below, wondering if he was with her, his mother, solving her problems. Or with someone else. I started making the payments myself when I could. My salary could barely cover the minimum once the late fees hit. I sold my grandmother's old silverware, some jewelry my parents had given me for my wedding. I stopped buying new clothes. I cut my hair short to save on shampoo, silly things, small sacrifices that didn't matter in the long run, but made me feel like I was fighting to keep something afloat. One night, when the final notice came, big red letters, cold legal language, I called Marina Sergeyevna at 2 in the morning. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Anya," she murmured, half asleep. "You worry too much. I told you, it's all under control." "It's not under control," I snapped. "They're going to take my flat. Do you understand that? My home." She was silent for a beat. Then she sighed, a long, dramatic exhale, like I'd disappointed her. "You know I'd never let that happen," she said softly. "You're my daughter now, aren't you? Trust me." And she hung up. I wish I could say I stopped trusting her then. I wish I could say I packed my bags, called a lawyer, did something. But I didn't. I clung to the hope that she would fix it, the same way I'd clung to Misha's promises in the beginning. Hope is cheap. But debt is not. When the final payment came due, I was the one who paid it, every last ruble I had, drained from my savings, my salary, the little stash my mother had given me, just in case. I paid it. I saved the flat. I saved my husband's name from shame. I thought I'd done the right thing. A month later, Marina Sergeyevna filed a lawsuit to claim my home. She stood in a courtroom, pale lipstick perfect, pearls back around her neck, and told a judge that my flat had never really been mine, that it was hers, bought with her money, held in my name, by agreement with my son. She looked me in the eye when she said it. She didn't blink once. I found out about the lawsuit on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was running late for work, keys in my mouth, trying to zip up my worn-out boots with one hand while scrolling through my phone in the other. There it was, an official-looking envelope poking out of my mailbox, the kind that makes your heart drop into your shoes before you even open it. I remember standing there in the stairwell, coat half on, boots undone, reading the first lines over and over. Hereby notified of the claim regarding the disputed ownership of the residential property located at. I thought it had to be a mistake. A clerical error. Maybe someone stole my identity. That made more sense than this. I called Misha first. He didn't pick up. I called Marina Sergeyevna next, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped my phone down the stairwell. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Anya, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back?" "There's a summons, Marina Sergeyevna," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It says you're suing me. Suing me for my flat. What is this?" A pause. Just the faint rustle of papers on her end. Then, her voice again, clipped and cold like a blade. "I told you, Anya. That flat was always meant to be held for the family." Misha agreed. "It's not personal. We can sort it out in court." "Not personal." She said it like she was discussing grocery shopping. Like this wasn't my home, the only thing I had left after I'd given her every ruble I owned. Misha agreed. I whispered. "When? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Another pause. Then, with that mocking sweetness I'd come to hate. "Ask your husband, dear. He knows." She hung up. I sat down on the cold concrete steps. Neighbors passed me by, pretending not to stare at the woman in a half-buttoned coat, hair unwashed, clutching a lawsuit in numb fingers. Somewhere inside me, a tiny flicker of disbelief sputtered out. In its place, something colder, heavier, settled in my gut. This was real. She was really doing this. When Misha came home that night, I was waiting. He smelled like cheap cologne and stale beer again, his shirt half untucked, that sheepish grin he used when he knew he'd done something wrong. I didn't yell. I just held out the papers. He tried to laugh it off at first. "A misunderstanding," he said. "Just a formality," he said. He poured himself a glass of vodka from the bottle he'd hidden behind the cereal boxes. "It's nothing, Anya. She just wants to protect the family assets. She's scared someone will take advantage of you if something happens to me." "If something happens to you?" I repeated, my voice scraping raw in my throat. "What about me, Misha? It's my name on the loan. My name on the title. I saved this flat, not her. Not you." He looked away, swirling the vodka in his glass. "She says it's what's best for all of us." And that was it. No apology. No plan. Just that pathetic shrug, like he was still a boy hiding behind his mother's skirts. I don't know how long I sat there on the couch after he stumbled into the bedroom. I stared at the stack of unpaid bills on the table. The cracked plaster above the window. The faint smell of old varnish that always reminded me of my grandmother. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up worrying about that loan, about the sacrifices I'd made to keep this roof over our heads. I thought about Marina Sergeyevna's eyes in that courtroom, how I'd see them again soon, cold and shark-like behind her lawyer's shoulder. For the first time since I'd married into this family, I realized I was truly alone in it. Misha wouldn't fight her. He never had. He never would. But I would. I found the old voice recorder the next morning, the one I'd bought years ago for work, back when I'd thought I'd study for my auditor's certification. I dug it out of a drawer, dusted it off, tested the batteries. I still had the recordings. I didn't know if they'd be enough. But they were all I had. Her voice, in my kitchen. Her promises, soft and trembling, I swear on my son, Anya, you'll get every ruble back. Her threats, too, veiled but there, if you don't help, Misha will lose everything. I sat at the table and listened to her over and over. The tears didn't come. Only a slow burn deep in my chest. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd be quiet. Let them think it. I called a lawyer the next day. I told him everything. The lawyer's name was Pavel Makarov, a man my colleague Lena had recommended in a hushed whisper by the coffee machine at work, the same day she saw my hands trembling so badly I couldn't get the sugar into my tea. He's expensive, she said, scribbling his number on a napkin. But he's ruthless. If anyone can handle Marina Sergeyevna, it's him. The next morning I stood outside his office, an ugly gray building wedged between a pawn shop and a dentist who never seemed to have any patience. I almost turned back twice. The place smelled like stale cigarettes and cold rain. The February slush dripping down from my hair into my collar didn't help either. Pavel's office was tiny but neat. He looked nothing like I'd imagined, not a slick shark in a tailored suit but a balding man with kind eyes that didn't match his reputation at all. He listened to my story without interrupting, tapping a pen softly against his notepad. Every few minutes he asked a precise question: date? Time? Who was present? When I told him about the recordings, he raised an eyebrow, the first real reaction I'd seen from him. You still have them? He asked. I nodded and pulled the recorder from my bag. The plastic was cracked at the edges from years of being shoved in drawers and forgotten, but it worked. I pressed play. Marina Sergeyevna's voice filled the little office, first the tears, then the sugar-sweet coaxing, then the cracks in her mask as she threatened what would happen if I didn't help. Pavel listened in silence, then leaned back in his squeaky chair and let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. This will help, he said. Quite a lot, actually. I didn't know whether to smile or cry. I did neither. I just stared at my hands in my lap, red and raw from the winter wind. What happens now? I asked. Pavel began to explain, the statements I'd need to prepare, the financial records to gather, the copies of the loan documents and bank transfers. Every piece of paper that proved I hadn't just given Marina Sergeyevna money, that she had asked for it, begged for it, promised repayment. He warned me it wouldn't be simple. Marina Sergeyevna had connections, old friends in the local administration, business partners who owed her favors. She would come armed with her own lawyers, probably 3 times as expensive as Pavel. She would twist my words if she could. Misha might be called as a witness, and Pavel didn't bother pretending my husband would stand on my side. Do you trust him to speak the truth? Pavel asked, his eyes steady on mine. I almost laughed. No, I said. Not anymore. Good, he said. Then don't tell him everything. From now on, anything you learn, anything you plan, keep it between you and me. He stood and shook my hand. His grip was warm, dry, oddly comforting. We can win this, he said. But you have to be ready for them to fight like devils. Do you understand? I did. Or at least I thought I did. That night, I found Misha in the kitchen, half drunk, poking at leftover pelmeni he'd microwaved too long. He asked where I'd been all day, his tone lazy, careless, like he expected me to say I'd gone shopping or met a friend. I told him the truth. I'd hired a lawyer. I was going to fight his mother's claim. His fork clattered onto the plate. "Anya, you don't have to do this," he said. He reached for my wrist, not roughly, but with that same soft pressure that used to thrill me when we were newlyweds, when I still thought I could trust the weight of his hand. "It's just paperwork. She doesn't mean it. She'll drop it once you calm down." "Once I calm down?" I said. My voice came out too flat, too cold, even I barely recognized it. "She wants my home, Misha. She wants everything I have left. If I lose this flat, where do I go?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the fridge, at the little magnets shaped like cartoon fruit, cheap souvenirs from trips we never really took together, but his mother liked to pretend we did. His silence made something inside me snap clean through. I went into the bedroom and locked the door behind me that night. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the muted clatter of Misha drinking alone. I wondered when exactly I'd stopped being his wife and started being the last piece of property his mother hadn't yet claimed. In the weeks that followed, I lived in two worlds, the quiet, careful world of my ordinary routines, work, grocery runs, polite smiles for the neighbors, and the secret world I built with Pavel. I made copies of every scrap of paper, my pay stubs, the bank transfers, the old loan agreement. I pulled out text messages, emails, all the desperate little digital breadcrumbs Marina Sergeyevna had left behind, never dreaming they'd be used against her. Each night, I recorded fresh notes, what Misha said, when he said it, how many times he asked me to just drop it and trust Mama. I didn't argue. I let him talk. I let him think I might still fold. But inside, the quiet burn had become something else entirely. Not rage, exactly. Not fear either. Just a cold, perfect clarity. I would not let her win. When the court date finally came, I ironed my best blouse, the one I'd worn for my job interview 5 years ago, back when I still believed the future was a straight road paved with small, sensible choices. I looked in the mirror at the faint lines at the corners of my eyes, the dark hollows from too many nights awake. I didn't look like a daughter-in-law anymore. I looked like a woman with nothing left to lose. The morning of the first hearing was bitterly cold. A damp wind pushed against my coat as I walked to the courthouse, not because I didn't have bus fare, but because I needed those 20 minutes alone with my breath clouding the air, my boots crunching the old dirty snow. Every step was a promise to myself, you will not let her take this from you. Pavel met me at the entrance, a steaming cup of coffee in one gloved hand, a battered briefcase in the other. He looked half like a tired uncle, half like a wolf in human clothes. He handed me the coffee without a word. He knew better than to ask if I'd slept. Inside, the courthouse smelled like stale paper and sweat under winter coats. People milled about the corridor, whispering behind stacks of files, heels echoing off the cracked tiles. Marina Sergeyevna's lawyer arrived first, a sleek, pale man in a perfectly tailored suit, flanked by an assistant who looked about 17 and terrified. They carried a folder so thick it looked like it might burst if you breathed on it too hard. And then she appeared, Marina Sergeyevna herself. She swept down the hall in a dark fur coat, lips painted blood red, pearls glinting under the flickering lights. For a second she looked exactly like the woman I'd first met, untouchable, powerful, so sure of herself that the air seemed to bend around her. But when her eyes found mine, she did something that almost made me laugh right there in that frozen corridor. She smiled. A sweet, pitying smile. As if to say, you poor thing. You really think you can win? She greeted Misha too. Yes, he came. Of course he came. He stood behind her, eyes darting to mine and then away again, like a guilty schoolboy. He looked ridiculous in his rumpled suit. I could still see a smudge of toothpaste on his collar. He wouldn't look at me for more than a second. He stayed close to his mother's shoulder, just far enough back to pretend he wasn't hiding behind her. When our names were called, my knees felt like hollow glass. Pavel put a hand on my arm, steady, firm, and guided me in. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. A high window let in weak gray light that made everything feel even colder. The judge, a thin woman with iron hair pinned at the nape of her neck, looked like she'd seen enough of people like us to last 10 lifetimes. Pavel spoke first, his voice clear but calm, explaining the nature of the loan, the collateral, the fact that I had repaid the debt entirely with my own income. He laid out the timeline like a surgeon opening a patient, each cut clean, each fact undeniable. When he played the first recording, Marina Sergeyevna's voice filled the room. "Anya, your family. I swear on my son, you'll get every ruble back." I watched her then, watched how her perfect face froze when she realized Pavel had more than just my word. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Misha's face drained of color, his hands twisting in his lap. When it was their turn, Marina Sergeyevna's lawyer leaned on the word agreement. He painted a picture of a sweet, naive mother protecting her family's wealth. He said the flat was always meant to be held for her, that she'd simply entrusted it to me until Misha's business was stable. He said there were private arrangements between mother and son that explained everything. The judge listened without interrupting. Once or twice, she glanced at me, her gaze flicking from my eyes to my folded hands resting on the table. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let them talk, the lawyer's honeyed words, Marina Sergeyevna's carefully chosen sighs. She even dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief when the lawyer spoke about her sacrifice for her beloved child. Misha didn't speak that day. He just sat there, avoiding my eyes, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I wondered if he understood, even then, how deep her hooks went into him, how willing he was to be nothing but her puppet. When the hearing paused for the day, Pavel and I stepped back out into the corridor. My knees were trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall. He handed me another coffee, cold this time, but I took it anyway. "You did well," he said. "You sat like stone. That's exactly what she hates." He was right. When Marina Sergeyevna swept past us on her way out, she didn't look at Pavel, just at me. For a flicker of a second, I saw the truth crack through her mask, the raw fury behind her smile. I was no longer the shy daughter-in-law who bowed her head and whispered yes, Mama, to keep the peace. Outside the courthouse, Misha finally caught up with me. He called my name. I stopped but didn't turn around. I felt him hovering behind my shoulder, his breath visible in the frozen air. "Anya, please," he said softly. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let it go?" I turned then. Looked him in the eyes, really looked at him. The boy I'd married was gone. All that was left was a man afraid to stand alone in his mother's shadow. "Because if I don't fight her now," I said, my voice steady even as my throat burned, "she'll take everything. And you'll let her." He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He just shoved his hands in his pockets and looked down at his shoes like a scolded child. I walked away before he could say another word. The cold bit through my coat, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was the slow, solid rise of something in my chest that I hadn't felt in years, my spine straightening. My voice sharpening. My name, my flat, my life, and this time, I would decide who they belonged to. After that first day in court, something in Marina Sergeyevna shifted, or maybe it was just that I'd finally learned to see her clearly. She stopped pretending. Gone were the calls that began with sweet Anya, dear. Now, if she called at all, it was through her lawyer, clipped, formal notices demanding documents she knew I didn't have, trying to trip me up in the details. Pavel told me not to answer. He handled it all, his voice calm and steady even when he was telling me things that made my stomach knot up like a fist. The nights were the worst. Misha drifted through the flat like a ghost I could barely stand to look at. Sometimes he'd try to speak, about the court, about maybe there's a way to settle. Each time, I'd shake my head before he could finish. He didn't understand that I wasn't fighting for the flat anymore. I was fighting for the truth. It was Pavel who found the first crack, late one evening when we sat in his cramped office, stale coffee growing cold between us. He had spread my old loan documents out on his desk, yellowed photocopies lined up beside bank statements, text messages, phone records. "Look at this," he said, tapping a finger on a bank transfer receipt. "This payment, it came from a different account. Not hers. Not yours. Do you know whose it is? I peered at the faint name beside the account number. It wasn't familiar. Should I? It's not your husband's either, Pavel said. He pushed his glasses up his nose and leaned back. But it's registered to an address in Saratov. She's been funneling money from there. I blinked at him, the words like static in my head. What does that mean? Pavel just watched me, waiting for it to sink in. It means this debt, this loan, it wasn't to save her business here. It was to patch something else. Something she didn't want anyone to see. I felt my skin crawl. I remembered her tears at my kitchen table, the way she'd pressed her trembling hands to mine and swore I was her only hope. All lies. And behind the lies, more secrets. The next days blurred into a haze of old receipts, phone calls, hurried notary visits. Pavel got hold of an investigator, a friend of his from his university days, a broad-shouldered man named Leonid who spoke so quietly I sometimes had to lean in just to catch his words. Leonid found her other address first, a tidy little house on the outskirts of Saratov, registered to a different surname, same birth date. Same woman. And then he found the man, not an old partner, not a brother or cousin like I might have guessed. A second husband. Or maybe the first one, depending on whose paperwork you believed. Marina Sergeyevna had two lives stitched together like mismatched cloth. One here, the well-dressed businesswoman with her precious, foolish son. And another there, a different man, a younger child, a modest trade shop that had quietly sucked up the money she claimed was for unpaid customs and crooked partners. When Leonid slid the photos across Pavel's desk, I felt like I was staring into a hole in the ground, a hole that had always been there under my feet, waiting for me to fall in. There she was in the blurry frame, Marina Sergeyevna, fur coat flung over her shoulders, kissing a tall man on a front porch. A teenage boy stood beside them, carrying her grocery bags. Your husband know about this? Leonid asked, his voice low, neutral. I shook my head. Of course he didn't. Misha, who still called her every other day asking, Mama, what do we do now? Misha, who'd spent years parroting her stories about sacrifices and debts and protecting the family name. If he'd known, he'd never told me. Maybe he hadn't wanted to know. When the second hearing came, we went in armed with more than recordings. We had the Saratov address, the secret bank transfers, proof that the money I'd risked my flat for had vanished into a life I hadn't even known existed. Pavel laid it out piece by piece, his voice so calm it made Marina Sergeyevna's lawyer sweat through his starched collar. I watched her this time, not just her face but her hands, the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her scarf again and again, her eyes flicking toward Misha, who sat rigid on the bench behind her. When the judge asked her to explain the second address, she didn't speak right away. Her lawyer jumped in, spinning a web of nonsense about private property arrangements and family privacy. The judge, stone-faced, merciless, asked again, this time more sharply. That's when she snapped. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic, just a crack in her voice, a hiss that slipped through clenched teeth. She glared at me like I was filth under her shoe. You think you're clever, Anya, she spat, too low for the judge to hear. You think this changes anything? But I could see it in her eyes, she knew it did change everything. The mask was slipping, piece by piece. She wasn't the powerful matriarch anymore. She was just a cornered liar. After the hearing, Misha followed me out into the bitter wind, his steps slow, dragging behind mine. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks, or maybe I was only seeing what had always been there. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, voice raw. Why didn't you say you were digging into her past? I turned to face him fully. For the first time in months, I didn't feel a tremor of guilt for the ruin between us. I did this to protect what's mine, I said. Something you should have done too. His mouth opened, maybe to defend her, maybe to defend himself. But the words didn't come. He looked down at the ground, shoulders hunched against the wind, like a boy who had lost his mother long before he ever met me. That night, alone in my flat, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where Marina Sergeyevna had wept and lied and begged. I played the old recordings once more, her voice scratchy and faint through the tiny speaker. I should have felt anger, or triumph, or even pity. Instead, I felt nothing at all. Just a steady, clean emptiness where my fear had been. There was no going back now. She would come for me again in court. But this time, she'd come stripped of her secrets. The third hearing was not the thunderstorm I'd imagined. It was quieter, colder, the soft, lethal calm after months of secrets rotting in the walls. By then, word of Marina Sergeyevna's second life had made its polite rounds through the courthouse corridors and the small circle of local business people who'd once kissed her ring. I arrived early, the taste of cheap coffee still bitter on my tongue. I sat on the hard bench outside the courtroom, my coat folded neatly in my lap, my fingers picking at a loose thread. Pavel stood beside me, flipping through the thick file one last time, the receipts, the text messages, the photos of the second house. He looked at me over his glasses, a flicker of a smile under his neatly trimmed mustache. "You're ready?" he asked. I nodded. I wasn't sure if ready was the word, but there was no space left inside me for fear. Just that same cold clarity. Inside, Marina Sergeyevna was already seated at the plaintiff's table, spine stiff as a steel rod. She wore a dark blue suit today, no pearls, no fur. She looked smaller somehow, the courtroom's stale light making the shadows under her eyes stark and unflattering. Misha sat 2 rows behind her, alone this time. No reassuring hand on his shoulder, no soft voice telling him how to stand, what to say, how to think. He looked at me when I entered, just for a second, and then dropped his gaze to his knees. The judge came in and the room shifted from a low murmur to heavy silence. The bailiff called the case number. Papers shuffled. Chairs creaked. It all felt so mundane for what was really happening, the slow peeling away of a mask that had covered so many lies. Pavel rose first, his voice smooth as river ice. He recapped the facts, the loan on my name, the flat as collateral, the repayments made entirely from my salary once Marina Sergeyevna's promises dried up like dead roots. Then he laid out the transfers, the hidden account in Saratov, the second property, the man whose name she hadn't dared speak. He didn't rush. He didn't sneer. He just laid it all bare, piece by piece, like a surgeon unwrapping a bandage from a festering wound. Marina Sergeyevna's lawyer tried to object, mumbling about irrelevant personal details and unrelated private affairs. But the judge only lifted a hand to silence him, her pen scratching slowly over her notes. Then came my turn. Pavel called me to testify. I stood, walked forward, my knees surprisingly steady on the scuffed wooden floor. He asked me the same questions he'd drilled into me a dozen times in his office. Why did you take out the loan? Because Marina Sergeyevna begged me to, told me I was family, that I was protecting my husband. How did you pay it back? A loan. From my wages, my savings, my grandmother's silver. Did you ever agree to transfer ownership of your flat? Never. There was no agreement, no promise. Just her tears, her threats, her lies. Then he asked the last question, the one that cracked the silence open. Did you know about her other household when you took this loan? I looked straight at Marina Sergeyevna. Her eyes met mine, flat and venomous. I wondered how she'd looked at the boy in Saratov. Did she hold his face in her hands the same way she'd once patted mine? Did she promise him she'd take care of him, too, at the cost of someone else's home? No, I said, my voice clear in the stale air. I didn't know. If I had, I would never have risked my family's only roof. She lied to me. To her son. To everyone. When I stepped down, Marina Sergeyevna rose. Her lawyer urged her to stay seated. I saw him tug at her sleeve, a frantic little gesture, but she shook him off like a dog shakes off water. She stood there, hands gripping the edge of her table so tightly her knuckles blanched. For a moment I thought she might cry again. But she didn't. Instead, her voice sliced the air like a shard of glass. You think you're clever, she hissed, not to the judge, to me, like no one else existed in that room. You think you've won something here? You're nothing without my son. Nothing. You'll lose him. You'll lose everything. She didn't care that she was giving the judge every reason to see her for what she was, a liar unraveling under her own pride. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. Misha flinched like he'd been struck. The judge cleared her throat sharply. Control yourself, Marina Sergeyevna, she said, her voice soft but with iron under it. If you have facts to present, present them. If not, sit down. For the first time, Marina Sergeyevna looked old. Not elegant. Not powerful. Just old and brittle and alone. She sat down. Outside, after the judge adjourned for the day, Misha followed me into the courtyard. The sun was already dipping behind the courthouse roof, cold light skimming over the dirty snow piled against the stone steps. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. Not with anger. Not with cruelty. Just the same cold honesty I'd come to carry like armor. You knew, didn't you? I asked him. Not everything, but you knew enough. You knew she'd bleed me dry if she needed to. And you let her. His face twisted, but no protest came. No lies, no excuses. Just the sad truth he'd never admit in front of her. I didn't want to lose her, he whispered. And that was the heart of it, wasn't it? Not just my flat. Not just my debt. But his fear of standing alone. You already did, I said. I didn't wait for his reply. I turned and walked down the courthouse steps, my boots crunching through the salt and grit. Pavel fell into step beside me near the gate. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "You did well." We both knew there would be another hearing, maybe two. The judge would review the new evidence. Marina Sergeyevna would try to spin another lie. But it didn't matter. The house of cards she'd built was already tumbling down. The final hearing fell on a Thursday that smelled like rain. The courthouse steps were slick with melting snow when I arrived, clutching my battered file of documents as if they were a shield. Pavel stood inside the entrance, calm as ever, a cheap umbrella dripping beside him. Today we finish this, he said simply. He didn't have to tell me what I already knew. This was the day the mask would be torn off for good, whether Marina Sergeyevna liked it or not. Inside, the air buzzed with a different tension now, like the whole room knew the end was near, and the ending wouldn't be clean. Marina Sergeyevna sat at her table, her lawyer to her right, an empty chair to her left where Misha should have been. But Misha wasn't here. He hadn't come this time, maybe too ashamed, maybe too afraid, maybe he'd finally realized the thing he'd clung to all his life was gone. Good, I thought. Let him hide. The judge entered and took her seat, her iron-gray hair pinned tighter than ever, her expression carved from stone. She wasted no time with pleasantries. She asked Pavel for his final statement. He stood, straightening the wrinkled sleeve of his jacket, and spoke in that steady voice that never rose, never cracked. He laid out the pieces again, the loan in my name, the payments I alone had made, the secret account in Saratov, the family hidden behind Marina Sergeyevna's carefully polished life. He reminded the court that not once, in all the hearings, had she produced a single signed document proving any agreement that the flat was hers. Not once had she brought proof that she had contributed a single ruble to that home, only words, threats, tears. Then her lawyer stood, but his voice was different this time, thinner, more desperate. He tried again to paint me as the cunning daughter-in-law who had trapped a poor, trusting mother. He tried to spin the double life as a private matter, irrelevant to property rights. But the judge cut him off with a single raised hand. No more spin. No more lies. She asked Marina Sergeyevna if she had anything to add. For a moment, I saw it, that flicker of the woman I'd once known. She sat there, stiff as a corpse, eyes glittering like a snake's. If she'd had a blade in her hand, I think she'd have stabbed me right there in that dusty room. I gave you everything, she spat suddenly, voice trembling. I brought you into this family. I made you one of us. And this is how you thank me? You ungrateful. Marina Sergeyevna. The judge's voice cut through the air like an axe through ice. Please confine yourself to facts. She fell silent. Her lawyer didn't even try to salvage it. It was done. When the judge read out her decision, I heard every word like a drumbeat through water. The flat is mine. The loan was mine, the debt, the payments, and so the home I'd risked to save her illusions would stay with me. The court recognized that there had never been any transfer of ownership, no written agreement, no legal grounds for her claim. The documents, the recordings, the hidden account, all of it had buried her under the weight of her own deceit. I didn't smile. Not when Pavel squeezed my hand, not when the judge rose and the bailiff called the next case. I just stood there, numb, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might shake me apart. Marina Sergeyevna didn't look at me as she left the courtroom. She brushed past me in a swirl of expensive perfume and stale bitterness, her pearls gone today, her hair pinned back so tight it looked painful. She didn't speak, not a threat, not a plea. She knew it was over. Outside, the rain had started, cold, persistent, washing the old snow from the courthouse steps. Pavel held his umbrella over both of us as we stood there, watching people drift past with their own small battles tucked in their coats. You did it, he said. Simple words, no soft pity in them. Just the truth. I looked up at him, feeling the first hot sting of tears at the corners of my eyes, not for her, not even for Misha, but for the girl I'd been when this all began. The girl who had believed that family meant trust. That tears meant truth. That debts were only numbers on paper and not weapons waiting to be turned back on you. A week later, I changed the locks on my flat. Misha didn't come home. He didn't call. Word drifted through neighbors and old friends that he'd moved into a rented room near his mother's dacha, or maybe closer to Saratov, chasing scraps of the life she'd left behind. I didn't look for him. I didn't need to. I cleaned out the cupboards, scrubbed the floors, opened the windows wide. I sold the old table where Marina Sergeyevna had cried her crocodile tears. I bought a new one, smaller, solid oak, just mine. When I sat at it that first evening, I made tea in my grandmother's old porcelain cup. The same cup I'd hidden away, afraid to break it. Now it sat in my hands, warm, unthreatened. One night, much later, I found Pavel's last message in my inbox, just a simple line from him, closing the file for good. Congratulations. You kept what was yours. And I did. No mother-in-law's tears. No husband's ghost promises. Just me. My name on the door. My feet on my floor. And not a single debt left that I didn't choose for myself.